the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him.
Borrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
So he,
sir, and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately. Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that.
When Dan Goldman and Kristi Noem sat across from each other in that hearing, nobody expected the room to shift the way it did. A single question about due process triggered one of the most intense exchanges of the entire session, and what followed exposed a deeper conflict inside the system itself. What you're about to see isn't just a clash, it's a spotlight on what happens when power, responsibility, and constitutional limits collide in real time.
I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Borrego Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So so I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that notwithstanding your statements under oath here today that Mr. Kilmar Borrego Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him and in fact require him to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Borrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Borrego Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence... So you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Borrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Borrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
so
sir, and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion better
We had
and
two
have more authority than the Supreme Court.
investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
No,
is
no, no, no.
investigators and law
That is
enforcement
you
officers
making that
and the case they
determination.
built against him. If you don't
The
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has
investigators,
considered all that,
then
Madam
who do you
Secretary.
trust if you
And
don't
if you would be
trust judges?
quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court order
who has terrorized
says
people
that
in
you
traffic
must take
with human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for due process, and that's under the Constitution.
Gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight too for
expired.
due process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize...
From the moment Dan Goldman began his questioning, the tone in the room changed. Not because he raised his voice and not because the topic was new, but because he aimed his focus at something foundational. Who gets to interpret the law and who has to follow it? It sounds simple. It should be simple. But in Washington, things that should be simple rarely stay that way. Goldman opens the exchange by asking Kristi Noem a question straight out of a high school civics class. Which branch of government has the constitutional authority to interpret the law? He wasn't asking for drama, and he wasn't setting a trap. He was laying the groundwork, establishing that the judiciary, not the executive branch, has the final say. And this is where the tension begins to build, because once the judge's ruling enters the conversation, everything shifts. Goldman presses on a key point. The judiciary determined that the individual at the center of this case did not receive proper legal process before being removed from the country. That's not Goldman's opinion. That's not political spin. That is a unanimous decision from the highest court in the nation. But instead of acknowledging that ruling directly, Noem pivots repeatedly to the allegations surrounding the individual. Allegations raised by investigators and agencies, yes, but not adjudicated in a full legal proceeding. And this is the heart of the clash. Goldman isn't arguing the allegations. He isn't defending the individual. His stance is something far more institutional. No one in a constitutional system gets to bypass the courts simply because they believe they're right. That's what keeps power in check. That's what keeps the law from becoming subjective. But every time he tried to return to that central point, the conversation veered. The pushback grew louder, the tone more defensive. And this is where the confrontation escalates, not because of the topic itself, but because Goldman kept asking the one question that the system often avoids: will you follow the court order? And when that question isn't directly answered, the frustration spills over. Goldman cuts in. Noem pushes back. The room tightens. Authority meets authority, and neither side yields ground. This is no longer just about one case. It becomes about the structure of government itself. What you're witnessing is the collision of two philosophies. One believes decisive action should override legal technicalities when public safety is involved. The other believes due process is not a technicality at all. It's the backbone that prevents power from drifting into something dangerous. Goldman's most cutting moment comes when he reminds Noem that following a court order is not optional, not political, not subjective. It is the core of constitutional obedience. And Noem's sharpest response comes when she turns the accusation back on Goldman, suggesting that his insistence on due process is actually advocacy for the individual rather than advocacy for the law. This is the moment that crystallizes the entire exchange. Goldman isn't defending the person, he's defending the principle. And Noem, standing firm on her position, refuses to concede that the system mishandled the case. Two worldviews, one courtroom's ruling, and a battle unfolding under the fluorescent lights of a committee room. By the time the chairman bangs the gavel, the damage is done. Not to either politician individually, they'll walk out and move on to the next hearing. The real impact is on the public watching the process and realizing something uncomfortable. When leaders disagree on who must obey a court order, the system itself begins to wobble. This wasn't just a clash, it was a warning, a reminder that the most dangerous conflicts in government aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes they're the ones about quiet principles that hold everything else together. If you want more breakdowns that go beyond the sound bites and bring clarity to the moments shaping the country, make sure you stick around, subscribe, and keep questioning everything, because accountability doesn't start in Washington. It starts with us paying attention.